I never thought I'd be the one to break, but the betrayal was too much to carry alone. It all started with the letter. It was a typical Thursday evening when I stumbled upon it. The house was quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that settles over you when you've been living a lie for so long that you don't even hear the cracks anymore. I was going through some old files, sorting through the mess of business records and papers for taxes when I found it an envelope stuffed between two folders. It didn't look like much at first, just a standard envelope, the kind you don't give a second thought. But then I saw the handwriting. Michael's handwriting. My son-in-law. I hadn't meant to open it. Not really, but something pulled at me, a strange unease that I couldn't shake. The envelope felt too heavy for its size, like it was holding a secret. I ripped it open, the sound of paper tearing too loud in the silence of the room, and there it was, a single receipt folded neatly inside. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. $50,000, that's what it said. But there was more, an account number I didn't recognize. My chest tightened. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. I remembered the day the transfer was made. It was just 2 months ago. Michael and Thomas had come over to discuss the future of the family business. Nothing out of the ordinary, or so I thought. I stood there, staring at that receipt, feeling the room spin around me. My thoughts were chaotic, like a storm breaking inside my head. Why would Michael transfer that kind of money, and why keep it a secret from me? I could barely breathe as my fingers traced the edges of the paper. The date, the amount, it all seemed too familiar, too planned. I thought I knew my family. I thought I knew the business, the people I'd spent my life building everything for. But in that moment I realized how blind I had been. This wasn't just a mistake, it was deliberate. The weight of the betrayal sank in deeper. My brother, my son-in-law, they had been working together behind my back, plotting to destroy everything I'd worked for. It wasn't just money, it was trust. They had taken something from me that I could never get back. I needed answers. I couldn't stop there. The next day I began digging, going through old files, old records, hoping it was some kind of mistake. But the deeper I dug, the worse it became. Another receipt. This one from Thomas, my brother, again $50,000, to the same account. That's when I knew. This was no accident, this wasn't just about money, this was personal. They were trying to take my legacy from me, piece by piece, and I had been too trusting, too loyal to see it. They'd used my love for them as a weapon, exploiting it until there was nothing left. I couldn't breathe, my mind screamed with the realization. Everything I had worked for was being stolen right under my nose. But I wasn't going to let this go. Not like this. I felt the rage building, but I held it in check. The pain was overwhelming, yes, but so was the clarity. The truth was finally coming to light, and now I had to plan. I had to take control again. I couldn't do it by force, not yet. No, I needed something better, something more powerful. I wasn't going to confront them immediately. That would have been too easy. I needed to plan to make them pay in the way that would hurt the most. I couldn't just reveal the truth. I had to make them feel it from the inside out. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and I could see the path ahead. But the first step was to make sure I had all the evidence. Everything they thought they had hidden. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. Not now, not after everything I had sacrificed. I could already hear Thomas and Michael's voices in my head, denying everything, playing innocent. But I knew the truth now. I had the receipts, the proof, and the will to destroy everything they had built on lies. My family would pay for what they had done, and they wouldn't even see it coming. I stood there, my hands trembling as I tucked the receipts into my drawer. The storm was coming, and this time I would be the one who controlled it. I was drowning in the silence of my own thoughts. But little did they know I was already planning my escape from this nightmare. It's funny how fast things can fall apart. One moment, everything feels fine, like you've got your life together, like you're in control. And the next, the ground is crumbling beneath your feet. That's exactly how it happened to me. One moment, I was just a man trying to run his business, keep his family together, and the next, I was a man on the edge, watching everything I'd built slip away. The receipts were still in my drawer, weighing heavily on my mind. But that wasn't even the worst part. It wasn't just the money they'd stolen or the lies they'd told. It was the way they'd destroyed me. My family, my trust, my future, all for their own gain. And the worst part? I had no one to blame but myself. I kept asking myself how I didn't see it sooner. How could I have been so blind? My brother Thomas, he'd always been the one who resented me, always the one who felt overshadowed by my success. But I never thought he'd go this far. And Michael, my son-in-law, the man I'd treated like a son, the one I'd trusted with my business, my family. How had he betrayed me like this? How had I allowed them to get away with it for so long? The worst part was the guilt. The guilt that came crashing down on me, suffocating me like a thick blanket. I'd failed my family. I'd failed myself. And now it felt like everything I had worked for was slipping through my fingers like sand in an open hand. I spent days staring at the walls of my office, going over everything. The business, my pride and joy, wasn't even mine anymore. I couldn't trust anyone. Not Thomas, not Michael, not even my own daughter, Emily, who had known about the betrayal but hadn't said a word. She was just as much a part of this mess as they were. But I couldn't let myself fall apart. Not yet. I had to keep going. I had to stay focused. Revenge was the only thing that kept me moving, the only thing that gave me a sense of control in the chaos. I stopped eating. I stopped sleeping. I spent every waking moment going over the evidence I had, piecing together the lies they'd built, the receipts, the bank statements, the recordings of the conversations they thought I'd never hear. I kept telling myself it would get better once I confronted them, once I exposed the truth. But every time I thought about it, I felt like I was suffocating. I tried talking to Emily, tried to reach out to make her understand, but she was distant, cold, even. I could see the guilt in her eyes every time I brought it up, but she wouldn't admit it. She wouldn't admit that she'd known what they were doing. I thought maybe she was scared of losing me, scared of what the truth would do to our family. But in the end, it was her silence that hurt the most. Her silence and her refusal to help me, to stand by me. I kept telling myself it wasn't her fault. She was caught in the middle, torn between her loyalty to her husband and her love for me. But I couldn't help feeling like she was just as much a part of this betrayal as Thomas and Michael were. Maybe she wasn't actively stealing from me, but she'd known about it, and she hadn't done a thing to stop it. I couldn't blame her. I couldn't, not entirely. But it didn't make it any easier. It didn't make the anger go away. But anger is dangerous. It can eat you alive if you let it. So I buried it. I buried it deep behind the walls I was building in my mind. Every time the anger started to surface, I pushed it down, replaced it with cold, calculated planning. Revenge would be my weapon. Revenge would be my justice. I spent hours, days, researching, looking for the leverage I needed to destroy them. I hired Linda Harris, a private investigator, to dig deeper into their financials. The receipts I had were just the tip of the iceberg. Linda had access to the kind of resources I didn't. She could get into places I couldn't. And that's exactly what I needed. I wasn't going to let Thomas and Michael walk away from this, not without paying for what they had done. The more I dug, the more I uncovered fraudulent contracts, hidden bank accounts, transfers made behind my back. I could feel the walls closing in on them, and I knew it wouldn't be long before they realized I was onto them. But I was patient. I had to be. This wasn't about acting on impulse. This was about making sure that when the truth came out, it would destroy them. It was around that time, mid-November, that I felt the first flicker of hope. It wasn't much, just a spark, but it was enough to keep me going. I had the evidence. I had the proof. All I needed now was the right moment to expose them. Thanksgiving was coming up. A family dinner. It was supposed to be a time of togetherness, of gratitude, but I knew it would be the perfect opportunity to confront them, to lay everything out on the table, and watch their world crumble. I could already picture it, the shock on their faces as I unveiled the truth, the fear in their eyes as they realized they had no escape. But as much as I was looking forward to it, I knew the cost would be high. Family would be torn apart, trust would be shattered. But what was left to save? What was left after the betrayal? As the days passed, the tension in my chest grew. Every moment felt like a countdown, like a ticking clock I couldn't stop, but I had no choice. I had to see this through for my family, for my business, for the man I used to be. The storm was coming, and when it hit, it would change everything. I couldn't just sit back any longer. I needed proof, and Linda was the key to uncovering the truth. It was strange how a part of me was still trying to protect them, even after everything they'd done. I kept looking for reasons to excuse their actions. I kept hoping that somehow I'd be wrong. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe there was a logical explanation. But every time I tried to convince myself of that, the receipts, those damn receipts, came back to haunt me. I couldn't afford to be naive anymore. This wasn't about family anymore. It was about survival, about making sure that Thomas and Michael didn't destroy everything I had worked for. I needed to get ahead of them before they had a chance to bury everything completely. So, I made the call. Linda Harris, the private investigator. I'd met her through an old friend of mine, a lawyer who specialized in corporate fraud. She was sharp, resourceful, the kind of person who could find answers no matter how deep they were buried. I couldn't let anyone know about this, not even Emily. I had to do this on my own. I couldn't risk her loyalty waver even more than it already had. She didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of this mess, not after everything she'd already been through. The moment I hired Linda, I felt a shift. There was a sense of control that had been missing. I was no longer just a victim of circumstance. I was actively plotting my revenge. And it felt good, damn good. We met in a coffee shop on the outskirts of town, a quiet place where no one would recognize us. Linda was exactly how I imagined her, professional, calm, and no nonsense. She listened as I laid out the details, the receipts, the bank transfers, the conversations I'd overheard. She didn't say much, just nodded and jotted down notes. I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope, like maybe this was finally the beginning of the end for Thomas and Michael. "I need full access to your accounts, Paul," she said, her voice low but certain, "and any other documents Youssef got. The more I have, the faster I can track the money." I handed her a stack of folders containing every scrap of evidence I had gathered, tax returns, bank statements, even personal letters from Michael. I watched as she flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning for something, anything that would tie everything together. I knew what I had to do next. I had to let go, let Linda do the digging while I focused on the next phase of my plan. But the hardest part? It was the waiting. It wasn't just that I was waiting for Linda to uncover the truth. I was waiting for the right moment to strike. Thanksgiving was approaching fast, and I had to make sure I was ready to expose them in front of the family. It had to be perfect. There could be no mistakes. If I rushed it, it could all fall apart. I spent those next few weeks on edge, constantly checking my phone for updates, but Linda wasn't one for giving too much away. I could tell she was working hard. She always seemed calm, like nothing fazed her, but I knew she was uncovering things I wasn't ready to face. The more I thought about it, the more I realized just how deep their lies went. This wasn't just about money. It was about control, power. They had been systematically undermining me for years, using my trust as a weapon. I had been their fool, but not anymore. I dug deeper into my own business, looking for signs that they had already started to make their move. I had to stay ahead of them, always a step ahead. I couldn't afford to be outsmarted. I started with my laptop. I went through every email, every communication I'd had with Michael and Thomas. Every single one felt like a punch in the gut. There were messages buried in our old threads, small things that at the time seemed harmless. But now, looking back, they all had the same undertone: deception. One email stood out. It was from Michael, sent just a week before that fateful Thanksgiving dinner the year before. He had sent it to Thomas, not even bothering to CC me, as if I wasn't even part of the conversation. The subject line was simple: plans for the business. But when I opened it, it hit me like a freight train. In it, Michael outlined how they planned to take over the family business, how they would phase me out and start making decisions without me. He even mentioned how I'd never catch on, because I trusted them too much. It was like reading a confession. And the worst part, it wasn't just a business decision, it was personal. This was the moment I realized the depth of their betrayal. They had planned this for months, maybe even longer. They hadn't just taken money from me, they had set me up to fail. Every decision they made was calculated, every move a step toward destroying me. And all this time I had been blind to it. But now I saw it. I saw them for what they really were, and I knew exactly how to make them pay. The next few days were a blur of calls, meetings, and planning. I met with Linda again, this time at a different cafe. The evidence she'd gathered was even worse than I expected. They hadn't just been siphoning off money, they had been falsifying records, manipulating accounts, hiding assets. This was no longer just a matter of money, this was fraud, and fraud had consequences. But the most damning piece of evidence? The bank account that they'd been using, Linda had traced it back to a shell company that they had set up under a different name. It was clever, it was devious, but it was also the key to everything. I wasn't going to confront them just yet. I couldn't. The time wasn't right, but I knew what I had to do. I had to let them dig their own graves. I had to keep them in the dark until the perfect moment. Thanksgiving was almost here, and when it came, I would be ready. The truth would be exposed, and everything they had stolen from me would be taken back. But I couldn't let myself get ahead of the plan. I had to stay focused. I had to wait. The storm was coming, and when it hit, it would be catastrophic. Every step I took felt like a small victory, but I knew the real battle was yet to come. It's strange how revenge can begin to feel like an addiction. At first, it's about the anger, the pure, unfiltered rage that drives you to make them pay. But then, as you start to gain control, it becomes more about the strategy, the precision of each move. Revenge is no longer just about hurting them. It's about ensuring that when it's over, they understand exactly why they fell. I had spent weeks building my case, digging through documents and emails, waiting for Linda to bring me the last piece of the puzzle. Every day felt like I was one step closer to exposing Thomas and Michael for what they were, frauds, manipulators, and liars. But I wasn't going to jump the gun. This had to be perfect. Every move had to be calculated, every detail in place. By the time Thanksgiving came around, I had already begun my first phase of sabotage. Small, subtle moves that would start to crack their perfect little world. A misplaced email here, a small transfer freeze there. Nothing too big, but enough to make them notice. Enough to make them start to feel the heat. I'd already pulled the first card, freezing a few of their private accounts. I didn't want them to catch on right away, so I made sure to use just a small portion of the company's funds. Nothing that would set off alarms, but I made sure it was enough to inconvenience them, to cause just enough trouble for them to start questioning whether they could continue their schemes without me. Thomas was the first to notice. He called me that afternoon, sounding more frantic than I'd ever heard him before. "Paul, what the hell's going on?" he asked, his voice sharp with panic. "I tried to make a transfer and the account SIP's locked. What did you do?" I played it calm, too calm. "What are you talking about, Thomas?" "I don't know what you mean. Maybe there's a glitch in the system. I'll have the IT guy check it out," I said, trying my best to sound like I had no idea what he was talking about. But in reality, I was watching everything unfold in front of me. His irritation was proof that he was starting to feel the pressure. I knew Thomas. He wasn't the type to get rattled easily, but now, with his little schemes starting to unravel, I could see the cracks forming. This was just the beginning. I waited for his next move, but I didn't have to wait long. It came the very next day in the form of an email from Michael, demanding an urgent meeting to discuss business. I could almost hear his voice through the screen, filled with frustration and anxiety. He didn't know it yet, but he was walking right into my trap. It was time to set the second phase into motion. I had Linda do a little digging into their business dealings. As it turned out, Michael and Thomas had been playing with fire, covering their tracks with false documents, opening accounts under fake names, and making transfers to overseas accounts. They thought they could bury it all under layers of lies. But Linda was thorough, and she found something that would bring everything crashing down. A fake contract they'd signed, showing that they had been siphoning money directly from the family business into their own private accounts. That document was my ticket to destroying everything they'd worked for. I knew I had to hold off on using it, at least for now. I wanted them to feel the burn of their own mistakes first. I wanted them to realize that every little move they made was slowly being undone. Every lie they told was about to be exposed. So, I began feeding them small pieces of information. I started planting seeds of doubt in their minds. I leaked details of their financial missteps to key people within the company, people who could make their lives difficult. A few whispered words here, a strategically timed conversation there. It was all part of the plan. It wasn't enough to just expose them. I had to make them feel the weight of their actions. I wanted to break them down mentally before I revealed the full extent of their betrayal. The weeks leading up to Thanksgiving were a blur of calculated moves and subtle manipulations. Every time I saw them, every time I spoke to them, I could see the anxiety in their eyes. The fear. They knew something was coming. They just didn't know what. I had made sure that every document, every email, every piece of evidence was carefully placed. I had hired a lawyer to make sure everything was airtight. The plan was in motion and there was no turning back. But I didn't want them to catch on too quickly. I wanted them to think they were still in control just for a little while longer. Then, just a few days before Thanksgiving, it happened. Thomas called me again, this time more desperate than ever. "Paul, we need to talk. This is getting out of hand," he said, his voice cracking under the pressure. "What's going on with the accounts? This is ridiculous. We need to fix this before it spirals further." I could feel the satisfaction building inside me, but I didn't let it show. "Thomas, relax," I said, my voice calm. "It's just a glitch, nothing to worry about. I helps get everything sorted out." I could practically hear his frustration through the phone, but I wasn't going to give him an inch, not yet. "You know, I've been thinking," I said, letting a little bit of my own tension slip through. "Maybe it's time to take a closer look at things. We've been too trusting for too long, and now it feels like we went into paying the price." I could practically hear him stewing on the other end of the line. He was pissed, and I loved it. But the next part of my plan was the hardest. It wasn't about the money anymore. It wasn't even about the betrayal. It was about what I was going to do with it all. When the moment finally came, I would lay it all out for them. The receipts, the fake contracts, the lies. I couldn't wait to see their faces when I dropped the bombshell on them. It was all going to come crashing down, and there would be no escape for either of them. I wasn't going to just take back what they'd stolen. I was going to make sure they knew exactly why they lost it all. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming everything they had stolen from me. By the time Thanksgiving rolled around, everything had been set into motion. The financial sabotage, the leaked information, the slow erosion of their credibility, it had all been leading up to this one moment. I wasn't just going to expose them, I was going to make sure they understood the full extent of their actions. I wanted them to feel the weight of what they had done to me, to my family, to everything I had worked for. The weeks leading up to Thanksgiving had been tense, but they had no idea what was coming. They were rattled, unsure of what was going wrong. Michael had called me multiple times, his frustration evident each time he spoke, but I kept playing it cool. I knew that the more pressure I put on them, the more they'd make mistakes. I had Linda continue her investigation, keeping an eye on any movements in their accounts. Every time they tried to cover their tracks, Linda found a new way in. It was like they couldn't stop themselves from digging a deeper hole. I had the documents, the fake contracts, the false bank statements, the emails between Thomas and Michael, everything I needed to bring them down. But I had to be patient. I had to wait for the right moment to strike, and Thanksgiving dinner would be it. The family dinner where everything would come to light. I spent the days leading up to the dinner preparing. I knew how explosive the revelation would be, so I made sure I was ready. I had everything organized, every document labeled, every detail memorized. I couldn't afford to miss a single piece of evidence. The night before Thanksgiving, I sat down with a stack of papers that would change everything. I couldn't sleep. My mind raced as I thought about the consequences of what I was about to do. This wasn't just about Michael and Thomas. This was about the end of a chapter in my life. The end of trusting the wrong people. The end of living in a world where everything I thought I knew was a lie. The morning of Thanksgiving, I was calm. I had already prepared my speech, rehearsed what I was going to say. I had planned every detail of the evening, from the moment we sat down to the moment I revealed it all. I could feel the tension building inside me, but I kept it under control. The moment would come soon enough. As I walked into the dining room that evening, I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. Emily was already there, sitting quietly at the table. She hadn't said much lately, and her silence had been deafening. I knew she was torn. She didn't want to believe what was happening, but deep down she knew she had to. Michael and Thomas came in shortly after, exchanging pleasantries, acting like nothing was wrong. But I could see it in their eyes. The fear, the doubt. They knew something was coming, but they didn't know what. The meal began like any other Thanksgiving dinner. The smell of turkey, the clinking of silverware, the casual conversation that everyone pretended was normal. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was all a facade, that the last few years had been one long, painful lie. And tonight it would all come to a crashing halt. I waited. I let the tension build as the meal wore on. The longer I waited, the more I could see them growing anxious. I could feel the weight of their lies pressing down on them, and I knew they could sense it too. Then finally it was time. The moment I had been planning for, the moment when everything would come crashing down. I stood up, my voice calm but firm. I think it's time we had a conversation, I said, looking directly at Michael and Thomas. Their faces went pale, and for a moment I could see the panic rising in their eyes. They knew something was coming, but they didn't know how much I knew. I reached into my briefcase, pulling out the stack of documents I had prepared. I laid them down on the table, one by one, watching their faces change as they realized what I was doing. The first document was a copy of the fake contract they had signed. The second was a bank statement showing the transfers they had made. And then came the emails. The emails that detailed their entire plan to undermine me, to take control of the business that I had spent my life building. This, I said, my voice steady, is what you've been hiding from me for years. I could hear the gasps around the table, but I didn't look at anyone else. My focus was on them, on Thomas and Michael. I watched as they shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes darting around the table looking for a way out. You thought you could get away with this, didn't it, you? I continued, my anger barely contained. You thought you could steal from me, ruin my life, and I wouldn't set notice. But I did notice. And now I sat not letting you get away with it. The silence in the room was deafening. No one moved, no one spoke. For a moment it felt like the world had stopped. All that was left was the truth they had been hiding for so long. Michael opened his mouth, but no words came out. Thomas tried to say something, but it was clear he knew there was no point. They had been caught. There was nothing they could say to make it right. I trusted you both, I said, my voice shaking with emotion. You were family. I gave you everything, and you betrayed me. And now I am taking it all back. I stood there staring at them as the weight of my words settled in. They didn't know what to say. They didn't know what to say. They didn't have any excuses. The truth was undeniable, and there was no escaping it. This was it. The moment of reckoning, the moment when everything they had worked for, the lies, the deception, the betrayal, came crashing down around them. And I watched it happen, knowing that they had no one to blame but themselves. They didn't know it yet, but the storm was already brewing. Thanksgiving had come and gone, and as the dust settled from the explosive confrontation, the aftermath was more deafening than I could have ever imagined. The dinner table, which had once been filled with laughter and light-hearted chatter, now stood silent, haunted by the weight of the truth I had unveiled. The fallout wasn't immediate. No, it never is with something like this, but it was inevitable. I watched as they tried to regain control. They tried to pretend like they hadn't been exposed, but the cracks were there and everyone could see them. The family could feel the tension, the undercurrent of betrayal that had poisoned everything. Michael and Thomas were no longer the untouchable figures they once were, no longer the trusted men who held power over me. They were just shadows of their former selves, trying desperately to cling to a facade that was already crumbling. Emily, my daughter, had been in the room when I laid it all out. Her face had been a mixture of shock and guilt, but I couldn't bring myself to look at her. Not yet, not until I had a chance to process the damage. She had known. I didn't want to admit it, but deep down I knew she had known. She had seen the signs, heard the whispers, But she had chosen to remain silent, maybe out of loyalty to her husband, maybe out of fear, but her silence had spoken louder than any words could have. And now she was part of it too. But that wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was watching Thomas and Michael scramble for control. They tried to cover up their lies, but there was no going back, no patching up what had been shattered. I could see it in their eyes. They were desperate. Desperate to salvage what little dignity they had left. But no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't hide the truth. They thought they could outsmart me. They thought they could take everything I had built and walk away without consequence. But they were wrong. I had given them enough time to stew, time to feel the weight of their guilt and their fear, and now I was ready to make my next move. As the days passed, the tension in the family grew. Every time I saw Thomas or Michael, I could feel the strain between us thick enough to cut through. They avoided eye contact. Their conversations were tense and clipped, and they didn't dare bring up the past. Emily, too, was different. She was withdrawn, her eyes always avoiding mine when I looked her way. The guilt was written all over her face, but she never spoke about it. She never acknowledged what she had allowed to happen. I was watching them all unravel, and I could feel the calm satisfaction in me growing. It wasn't over yet, but it was getting closer. The plan had been set in motion. I had made sure every detail was in place. The financial documents I had carefully gathered, every receipt, every email, every contract were waiting for the right time to be used. Linda had done her part, digging up everything she could about Michael and Thomas's fraudulent dealings. She had found evidence that went beyond what I could have imagined. Hidden assets, laundered money, off-the-books accounts. The more we uncovered, the more I realized how deep their greed ran. This wasn't just about taking control of my business. This was about them wanting everything, my legacy, my family's fortune, and my entire future. But I couldn't act on it yet. I couldn't let my anger get the best of me. I had to be patient. I had to wait for the right moment to strike again. Thanksgiving had been the first step. Now I had to make sure that when the final blow came, it would be undeniable. It had to be clean. It had to be final. I spent the next few weeks quietly observing every conversation, every move they made. It was all part of the plan. I kept everything close to my chest. I wanted them to believe that they still had a chance to fix things. I wanted them to think they were in control, because once they thought that, I would take it all away in one swift motion. During this time, I started to notice a change in Emily. Her behavior had shifted subtly at first. She would send me text messages, asking how I was doing, telling me she loved me. It was almost as if she were trying to make amends, trying to find a way back into my good graces. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to think that she was finally seeing the truth, but every time I looked at her, I couldn't shake the feeling that her guilt was too deep. She had known about the betrayal. She had been part of it, even if she hadn't directly taken the money. I couldn't talk to her, not yet. Not until I was sure she understood what was at stake. I needed her to feel the weight of what had happened before I could let her back into my life. It was during this period of tension, as the days dragged on, that I realized something crucial. Revenge wasn't just about punishing those who had wronged you, it was about taking back what was rightfully yours. It was about making sure that your life, your legacy, wasn't stolen away by the people you trusted the most. I had lost everything I had worked for, and now I was going to take it all back, piece by piece. But the hardest part? The hardest part was what came next. The moment when I would finally expose everything for the world to see. I wasn't just going to take back what they had stolen. I was going to expose them for what they truly were: greedy, manipulative, and utterly dishonest. The world would know who they really were. But there was still time before that moment. Still time to let the tension build. Still time to let them squirm, to feel the consequences of their actions without knowing exactly when the final blow would come. And as I watched them struggle, I couldn't help but feel the satisfaction building inside me. They were already defeated. They just didn't know it yet. The silence after I spoke was deafening. No one could look me in the eye anymore. It was time. The wait was over. Thanksgiving was here, and the moment I'd been preparing for had arrived. The calm before the storm. The stage was set, and I was ready to expose them all for the frauds they were. But I wasn't just doing this for revenge. No, this was bigger than that. This was about reclaiming my life, my legacy, and making sure they understood the cost of betrayal. I had everything planned out to the smallest detail. I made sure the timing was perfect. The atmosphere was ripe for a confrontation, with everyone gathered around the table, the warmth of the turkey in the air, the clinking of silverware, and the awkward silence hanging over us. They had no idea what was coming. They thought they had escaped, but they were wrong. As everyone settled into their seats, I could see the fear in Thomas and Michael's eyes. They were nervous, but they were still trying to play it cool. I didn't take my eyes off them for a second. Every move they made, every word they spoke, it was all part of the plan. They didn't know it yet, but the walls were closing in. It all started innocently enough. The usual banter at the dinner table, people talking about their day, catching up on family news. But I could feel the tension building, thickening in the air. It was like everyone knew something was off, but no one could put their finger on it. Michael kept glancing around, trying to make eye contact with anyone who would look at him, but no one did. And Thomas, he was the worst of all. He kept shifting in his seat, his hands trembling slightly. He knew this wasn't just another dinner. He knew it was the beginning of the end. It was when dessert was being served that I decided it was time. The moment had arrived. The calm before the storm had stretched long enough. I stood up, my voice cutting through the chatter. Everyone, I think it's time we talk about something, I said, my voice steady, almost calm. But underneath there was a tension that couldn't be ignored. There said something that said's been weighing on me for a long time, and it said's time I laid it all out. I could see Michael and Thomas tense up at the words. They knew exactly what was coming. But they weren't ready. None of them were. I reached into my briefcase, my heart beating a little faster. This was the moment. I wasn't going to hold back any longer. No more second guessing. No more wondering if I should go easy on them. I had every right to expose them. They had taken everything from me. They didn't deserve an ounce of mercy. I pulled out the stack of documents. Receipts, contracts, emails. The paper seemed to weigh more than it should. I could feel the eyes of the room on me, but I didn't look away. I kept my gaze fixed on Thomas and Michael. I could see their faces blanch as I laid the first piece of evidence on the table. This, I said, my voice cold, is a copy of a fake contract you signed, Michael, one that Youssef been using to siphon money from the family business. The room went silent. The noise of the dinner, the clinking of silverware, the casual conversation, it all disappeared like it had never existed. All that was left was the truth, the ugly, undeniable truth. Michael opened his mouth, but no words came out. His lips trembled, his face going pale. He tried to regain his composure, but it was too late. The damage was already done, and there was no hiding from it. I laid the next document down. A bank statement, one that showed the fraudulent transfers they had made behind my back. This is the money you've been stealing from me, Thomas, I said, watching his face twist in a mixture of anger and fear. And you, Michael, you've been helping him cover it up. The room was still. No one dared to speak. No one moved. The truth was there, laid out for everyone to see. You've been working together? Heaven set you? I asked, my voice dripping with disdain, trying to take control of everything I built. My business, my family. And you thought I wouldn't find out? I could see the panic in Michael's eyes now. The fear was evident, his hands shaking as he looked down at the papers. Thomas, on the other hand, was trying to remain stoic, but the cracks were showing. I could see his resolve starting to crack, his carefully constructed facade falling apart. You both thought you were clever, didn't you? I continued, my voice rising with the anger that had been building in me. You thought you could steal from me, ruin my life, and I'd never notice. You thought I was too stupid to see what you were doing, but I saw it all. Every lie, every deceit. I paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. I could hear the others in the room shifting, unsure of what to say, unsure of how to react, but I didn't care. This wasn't about them. This was about me. This was my moment, and I was going to take it. I pulled out the final piece of evidence. A recording one I had made of a conversation between Thomas and Michael, where they openly discussed their plans to undermine me. This, I said, is the final nail in the coffin. The proof that you two have been working together to destroy everything I've ever built. I played the recording, the voices of my brother and my son-in-law filling the room. The words they spoke, ugly, manipulative, were undeniable. I could see the color drain from their faces as the room absorbed the reality of what they had done. The silence was suffocating. No one spoke, no one moved, and then as the final words echoed through the room, I saw it, the look in Michael's eyes, the recognition that his world was falling apart, that there was no way out. You thought you could take everything from me, I said quietly, almost to myself, but you were wrong. Everything Youssef done to me, every lie, every betrayal will come back to you. The silence hung in the air, heavy and thick. The room was still, everyone waiting for the fallout, for the consequences. And I knew then that there was no going back. This was it. The final confrontation. The truth was out, and there was no escaping it. I thought this would feel like victory, but all I felt was emptiness. The truth had been laid bare for everyone to see, and the consequences were swift. It was like a house of cards crumbling to the ground. Michael and Thomas sat there, their faces ghostly pale, as the evidence I had painstakingly gathered played out in front of them. The room was suffocating, and for the first time in years I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. I had exposed them for what they truly were: greedy, manipulative, deceitful. They had nowhere to hide now. But as the minutes stretched on, the weight of it all began to settle in. I had spent so long focused on getting to this moment, on getting the revenge I so desperately needed, that I hadn't really thought about the aftermath. The damage was done. My brother and my son-in-law were exposed, their reputations shattered, their schemes unraveled. But what did that leave me with? Emily sat in the corner, her face flushed with guilt. She hadn't spoken a word since the truth came out. I didn't blame her. She was caught in the middle of this mess, but deep down I knew she had been complicit in her own way. She had seen the signs, heard the whispers, but she chose to stay silent. How could I ever forgive her for that? How could I ever look at her the same way? I wanted to reach out, to pull her into an embrace and tell her it was going to be okay, but I couldn't. Not after everything that had happened. Not after the betrayal that ran deeper than blood. As the silence in the room stretched on, Thomas was the first to speak. His voice was strained, barely a whisper. "Paul, we didn't set mean for it to go this far," he stammered, his usual confidence gone. "It wasn't set supposed to be like this. We thought we could help. Help." The word cut through me like a knife. They thought they were helping? They thought betraying me, stealing from me, destroying my life was somehow helping? "You don't get to spin this," I snapped, the anger rising in my chest once again. "You took everything from me, my trust, my family, my future, and you think you can just apologize and make it better. No. This isn't set about fixing things. It's set about facing the consequences of your actions." Michael, who had been silent up until that point, finally spoke, his voice cracking. "We never meant to hurt you," he said, his eyes darting around the room. It all got out of control. We thought we could turn things around. We thought you wouldn't set notice." I could hardly contain my laughter, the absurdity of his words catching me off guard. "You thought I wouldn't sit notice? You thought I wouldn't sit notice you stealing from me? You thought I wouldn't sit notice the lies? The deceit?" I let the silence hang in the air as the weight of their words and their betrayal settled in. There was no turning back for them now. They had exposed themselves, and there was no way to undo what had been done. But even as I watched them scramble to explain themselves, I felt a hollow emptiness settle in my chest. This wasn't what I had imagined. This wasn't the victory I had thought it would be. All the anger, all the planning, all the suffering, it had led to this moment, and yet all I felt was numb. I had expected satisfaction. I had expected to feel like I had reclaimed something, my family, my business, my life. But instead I felt a cold emptiness, like I had lost something much bigger than I had ever realized. As the minutes dragged on, I realized something crucial. I hadn't just lost my trust in Thomas and Michael. I had lost my trust in myself. How could I have been so blind? How could I have been so naive to think that family was enough to keep me safe? The fallout from that dinner was quick. News of the betrayal spread through the family like wildfire. The phone calls and messages started pouring in, each one a reminder of how deep the wound ran. People I had trusted, family members, friends, associates, began to distance themselves from me. And I understood they didn't want to be a part of this mess. They didn't want to be associated with the destruction that had come from this betrayal. But it wasn't just Michael and Thomas who had to face the consequences. I had to too. I had to look at the wreckage of my own life and wonder if it was all worth it. Was this the price of justice? Was this the cost of revenge? As I walked through the empty house that evening, the silence was unbearable. The walls that had once felt like home now seemed foreign to me. The memories of family gatherings, of laughter, of moments that felt real were all tainted. How could I go back to the way things were? How could I ever rebuild what had been lost? I didn't have the answers. Not yet. But I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't undo the damage. I couldn't take back what had been done. The only thing I could do now was move forward. I had done what I set out to do. I had exposed the truth. I had made them pay. But the victory I had imagined wasn't as sweet as I thought it would be. There was no joy in their downfall, no satisfaction in seeing them broken. It only left me with an empty feeling in my chest, a feeling that I couldn't shake, no matter how hard I tried. As the days passed, the reality of the situation began to settle in. I had won, yes, but in the end, there was no real triumph. No sense of closure, no sense of peace, just a lingering emptiness that would follow me for the rest of my life. Justice wasn't the applause, it was the quiet peace I felt when I finally took control. It wasn't a victory. Not really. It wasn't the satisfaction I thought I'd feel when I'd plotted every move, every step toward exposing them. No. The reality of justice was far more somber than I had imagined. As I stood in the courtroom, watching Thomas and Michael face the consequences of their actions, I realized something crucial. Justice wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming what was mine, and more importantly, about regaining control of my life. The trial wasn't long. They pleaded guilty to the charges: fraud, embezzlement, money laundering. The evidence was overwhelming. They had no choice but to accept the truth. But even as I sat there watching them crumble under the weight of their lies, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like I had won. I just felt Emily wasn't there. She had distanced herself from the whole situation, refusing to be part of the legal proceedings. I couldn't blame her. She had been caught between the truth and the family she still wanted to believe in. But her absence weighed heavily on me. This wasn't just about Michael and Thomas anymore. This was about the entire family being torn apart. And in the end, it wasn't just them who had lost. It was me too. I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to see them in their seats, looking like broken men. But I couldn't walk away. Not after everything. The justice I had fought for was cold, impersonal. The law had taken its course, but it hadn't healed anything. It hadn't fixed the years of betrayal, the years of silence from the people I had trusted most. The courtroom was silent as the judge handed down the sentence. Thomas was given 5 years, Michael 4. Their sentences weren't long enough to make up for the damage they'd done, but it was something. It was justice, of sorts. But even as I heard the judge's words, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't enough. What was the cost of losing everything? What was the price of seeing your family fall apart? They were led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. Their heads hung low. For a moment I almost felt sorry for them. Almost, but then I remembered everything they had done. The lies, the manipulation, the way they had stolen from me, destroyed my life. They deserved this. But that didn't make the pain go away. That didn't fill the emptiness inside me. The weeks that followed were a blur. The legal fallout continued, with the business being forced into bankruptcy proceedings. Everything I had worked for, the legacy, the empire I had built, was lost. The family business, the Matthews name, it was all gone. Even with the legal victories, even with the justice I had fought so hard for, nothing could bring back what I had lost. I went back to the house that had once been filled with laughter, with the promise of a future. It was now empty, hollow, a reminder of everything that had been taken from me. The walls felt cold, the memories of better days haunting me at every turn. What did I have left? What was the point of all this if there was nothing to come back to? I tried to reach out to Emily once more. I texted her, hoping she would respond. But she didn't. She had chosen her path, and I had to accept it. She wasn't coming back. She wasn't going to forgive me for what I had done, and I couldn't blame her. The aftermath of the trial was just the beginning of a new chapter in my life. I didn't know where I was going or what I would do next, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep living in the past. The betrayal, the lies, the revenge. It was all behind me now. What mattered was what I did moving forward. It was in those quiet days after the trial that I began to rebuild, slowly, piece by piece. I had lost the business, but I still had my skills. I had my knowledge, and I had the ability to start over. The family I had fought for was gone, but I still had a future, and for the first time in a long time I was able to see that. Revenge had been my driving force, but now it was time to let go of that anger. Time to stop letting the past define me. I wasn't the man I had been before. I wasn't the same Paul who had trusted blindly, who had loved without question. That man was gone, and in his place was someone new, a man who had been broken but had learned to stand up again. I didn't need to keep fighting. The battle was over. The truth had been exposed, and now I could finally move forward. It wasn't the closure I had imagined, but it was closure nonetheless. I had regained control of my life, and that was enough. You didn't set lose me, you gave me away. Those words lingered in my mind long after the trial was over, long after the dust had settled and the courtroom had emptied. They weren't just words, they were the truth. The bitter, painful truth that I had to come to terms with in the quiet aftermath of everything that had happened. It wasn't the justice I had envisioned. It wasn't the catharsis I had expected when I first set my mind on revenge. No, what I had fought for, what I had hoped would bring me peace, had only left me with an emptiness that was harder to shake than the anger had ever been. I had spent so many years building walls around myself, protecting my family, my business, my future. But in the end, I realized I had been protecting the wrong things. I had spent so much of my life focused on what I had, on the legacy, the empire, the family business, that I never stopped to consider what I had truly lost in the process. The trial, the exposure, the revenge. It had been necessary, but it had come at a cost. And no amount of justice, no amount of retribution, could fill the void left in its wake. I had to come to terms with the fact that I had lost more than just my business. I had lost my family, my daughter, my brother, my son-in-law. The people I had trusted the most had betrayed me, and in the process they had taken everything from me, not just money, not just assets, but my faith in people, my trust, my belief that family could be something solid, something real. I couldn't get that back. No matter how many courtrooms I stepped into, no matter how many documents I had signed, I couldn't undo the years of betrayal. I couldn't rebuild the family that had been torn apart. And as much as I wanted to, I couldn't stop the feeling that my fight for revenge had only made it worse. It was early winter, and the coldness outside seemed to match the chill I felt inside. The world outside was starting to change. The leaves had fallen, the branches were bare, and the sky was overcast, reflecting the way I felt inside. But even in the coldest moments, there was a sense of inevitability. There was no going back, no rewinding time, no undoing the damage that had been done. The hardest part wasn't the trial. It wasn't the confrontation. It wasn't even the months of planning or the final exposure. The hardest part was what came after. The emptiness that settled over me once the dust had cleared. Once the revenge had been taken, it wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was loss. It was realizing that everything I thought I had been fighting for had been an illusion. I hadn't just lost my family. I had lost myself. The person I was before all this had died somewhere along the way. The man who trusted without question, who believed that family was everything, had been replaced by someone else. Someone hardened, someone who could see through the lies but couldn't find peace in the truth. And yet, as I sat in the stillness of the house that once held all my memories, I realized something important, something I had missed along the way. the revenge, the justice. It had been a necessary part of my healing. I couldn't deny that. But it wasn't the end. It wasn't the solution to everything. There was no closure to be found in that. No true satisfaction. What I needed wasn't the destruction of my enemies, but the rebuilding of myself. The acceptance that what had been broken could never be fixed, but that I could still move forward, that I could still find a way to live without being defined by the past. I thought back to the beginning of it all, when I first discovered the betrayal, when the receipts, the contracts, the lies were all laid bare before me. It felt like the world was crashing down, like everything I had worked for was slipping through my fingers. But in that moment of pain, I realized something important. It wasn't the loss of my family that hurt the most. It was the loss of myself. I had let my obsession with revenge consume me. I had let it become my purpose, my driving force. But now I understood that the only way to move forward was to let go, to stop being haunted by the past, and start rebuilding my future piece by piece. It wasn't going to be easy. In fact, it was going to be one of the hardest things I'd ever done. But I couldn't keep looking over my shoulder, couldn't keep letting the ghosts of the past haunt me. Revenge had brought me no peace, only more pain, and the only way to heal was to find my own peace. The road ahead was uncertain. I didn't know where I was going or what I would find when I got there, but for the first time in a long time I felt like I had a choice to walk away from the wreckage of my past and build something new, something real. Maybe that was the real justice I was seeking all along. Not the destruction of the people who betrayed me, but the rebirth of the man I had been before I lost myself. You didn't lose me, you gave me away. Those words haunted me, yes, but they also gave me clarity. They were the final truth I needed to face. The truth that no matter how much I wanted to fix everything, the only thing I could truly fix was myself. And as I stood at the edge of everything I had built, I realized that the most important thing I could do now was to rebuild, not just my business, but my life. And in doing that, maybe I could finally reclaim the peace I had been fighting for all along.